Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Breakouts, a podcast where we interview extraordinary founders in just under 20 minutes. I'm your host, Akkshay Khosla. Now, you'll find many podcasts out there that are 2 to 3 hours long and interview these wildly successful founders after they've already made it big. But by that point, the founders are already 5, 10, or even 15 years into their journey, so their insights just aren't as actionable anymore. We're doing things a little bit different. We're interviewing founders that are on the cusp of breaking out so that you can learn the playbooks they're using to build category-defining companies today. And we're doing it in just under 20 minutes. Now, just before we get started, go ahead and follow us on Twitter at The Breakouts Pod, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and join our Discord community for aspiring founders. The link is in the description below. And I think that's everything I have for you. So without further ado, here's today's guest. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Breakouts. Today, we have an amazing guest for you. We have Brian Retford, the co-founder and CEO of Risc Zero. Now, Brian recently raised a $13 million seed round earlier this year for his company building in the crypto infra space. Brian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Now, Brian, as you know, we're going to do 2 episodes together, and this first episode is going to be focused on the story behind your startup and how you think about winning the industry. So to get us started off, if you had to describe just in a few sentences, what does your startup do and what problem are you guys trying to solve?
Yeah, our startup uses the latest sort of advances in zero-knowledge cryptography to greatly expand what's possible in the realm of decentralized distributed computing. So we make it possible to build cloud-scale decentralized infrastructure.
Very cool. And what's your personal background? What were you doing before the startup and what kind of led you to this journey?
So personal background, CS major, generally more on the eng management side. Been through a bunch of different startups. Really, it's the co-founders and me have stuck together through a couple different startups, and we all know each other from the sort of computer hacking scene. So we've always just really been into networking and the kind of cyberpunky ethos that comes along with the space. So at some point, that led us to start this company, I guess. But prior to this, I was managing AI compiler infrastructure at Intel, which was that sort of earn out from another startup that was doing the same thing called Vertex AI.
Very cool. And did you co-found that startup?
I did, yeah. I was the CTO there.
Awesome. Very cool. It's really interesting how you guys have stuck together across multiple ventures. I'm guessing that the working relationship you build even becomes a bit of a competitive advantage.
Yeah, kind of a secret matter.
There you go. Awesome. So let's dive a little bit deeper into what your startup does and dissect it in layman terms. So you said that you build a technology that uses zero-knowledge proofs to empower more use cases for crypto companies, right?
Yeah. The goal is to really empower sort of anyone who doesn't want to be building on top of sort of decentralized monolithic tech stacks. So AWS or GCP. I really think of those companies and platforms as our ultimate competitor. I spent a lot of time at the Google Cloud Platform helping build their pricing infrastructure. And I saw a lot of services that didn't get built and a lot of features that didn't get offered because there was no way to maintain, 95% margins. And you see a lot of tension with AWS and Mongo and these people. So yes, we want to make crypto infrastructure to enable the whole space, but we also really just want to build cloud too. We're kicking around the name.
Interesting. So part of your reasoning for going this route is that this unlocks a new economic model where you have the ability to build other features that, perhaps these big cloud provider companies couldn't do.
Yeah, or aren't willing to do. So we really want to open up the sort of innovation landscape for other cloud services. And who knows the number of people at Google that I saw come up with great projects that would never going to get built for any number of reasons, but usually because it didn't pencil out. But that lets people, the goal is to enable cloud service providers and also application authors to just really in a more permissionless and decentralized, open and free manner.
So how does decentralization here or your approach altogether unlock that ability to go after these use cases that might not yield a 95% profit margin?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at, as an engineer, the insane salaries that big tech pays, but still the amount of money that each individual sort of engineer brings in. There's clearly a huge opportunity to still make a great amount of money for yourself and also not necessarily keep pumping the bags of these companies. So how we think about actually enabling that, basically building a sort of exascale transaction sort of infrastructure that will let, payments to infrastructure providers be recorded at a very granular and high throughput levels. So this also extends to building applications and decentralized exchanges. There's a certain light in which you could look at wanting compute as kind of a double-ended order book, et cetera. So crypto, I think, is very, very well suited for this kind of use case. And ZK lets us really achieve billions of transactions a second.
I'm curious, you mentioned there that these big tech companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, et cetera, basically all the big cloud providers, they pay engineers quite a bit, but at the same time, they still make a very large multiple per engineer on the amount that they pay them. I'm curious, let's say for a second that we assume this multiple was 5x. I'm not sure what the actual multiple is, but let's assume. How do you think that the technology that you were building allows you to do otherwise?
I think the main thing is that it frees people up to do what they want to do. I loved my time at Google. I still very much respect the company and I respect these other companies, but I think especially if you look across the Web3 landscape and we'll see what happens with the venture climate, but it's much easier to start a startup now in so many dimensions than it used to be. So I think it's more about like people's sort of freedom and creativity to build the kind of services that they want to build and bring into the world to enable new applications. So I really see it as pushing the lever more on make a similar amount of money and actually control your destiny rather than having the VP of product in your division tell you that you just can't do what you want to do.
Interesting. And is that a function of even your development process being decentralized?
I think the goal is to launch this product as effectively, a decentralized permissionless infrastructure. So we won't own it. It will be effectively a public good that anybody can launch new cloud services on, just like people think of Ethereum or Bitcoin, maybe not so much some of the other chains, but we're really focused on bringing something to the market that is really an open platform for people to innovate on.
Very cool. So what it sounds like to me is more of a decentralized open app store for cloud services. Is that fair?
That is fair. So you look at Google Cloud Platform and I sort of referencing MongoDB, there's a well-known sort of incident between MongoDB and AWS Marketplace where AWS basically kept threatening to destroy them by forking MongoDB and launching their own version of MongoDB. So, and then eventually they came to some kind of settlement or whatever. But the fact that they had to go through all of that just for, effectively the people who invented their product to bring it to the marketplace just shows you how captured that is by big tech. Just like the Apple App Store,
Interesting. That is so cool. I think now I understand it better. So you're saying that, hey, if we can create this app store for cloud services in a decentralized way, then collectively, the developers that decide to build on that, developers, maybe even companies, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
They will be able to unlock a much larger volume of use cases than any of these traditional cloud providers would go on. And that is what's going to get us to Cloud 2.0. Is that a fair summary?
I think so, yes. And also in the meantime, unlock a bunch of use cases that feel a bunch more like Web3 things because of the sort of highly integrated payments technology that can't really be brought to market due to scaling limitations. Now, the space is doing a good job of increasing the scalability of a lot of solutions, but I still see people trying to build like SQL solutions on top of Ethereum, and a lot of their infrastructure still ends up running on Amazon. So there's not really a place to build, I think, good decentralized database offerings or any of the kind of myriad of services you'd see on a more public, quote unquote, public cloud or cloud one kind of offering.
Very cool. So tell us a little bit more about your product and how it works. Let's say that I am a developer or a company and I discover your product. From the time that I discover it to the point where I realize value from it, what is that journey?
Yeah, I think that journey, we're pretty early. I think we sort of made this open source project called Risc Zero. People can check it out. And whether people perceive value in it or not, I think right now has a lot to do with how much they understand ZK proofs and the ecosystem of potential solutions. So I think it's going to be the sort of getting that to a reasonable place is currently what we're working on. So in the next couple of months, we hope to have like a much more developer friendly offering. But right now, what the product looks like is, so in the ZK space, this is maybe a bit of a deep dive in ZK firmware here, but ZK.
Let's do it. Yeah.
So the way to think about zero knowledge programs is that it lets some persons like attest that they know a program that when given a certain set of inputs produces a certain output. And you can create a very small proof of that. And you can choose to reveal basically none of that. You can just say, I know a set of inputs that hash to X, and I know a program that hashes to Y, and the output is Z. And you can create a proof of that. So the question really comes up, like, what kind of programs can you represent? So the systems people have made, the mathematical systems, the cryptographic systems that can do this kind of crazy thing. Like, my mind was blown when I realized you could actually like distinctly prove any kind of statement. Like, if I ran the Linux compiler, I could create a zero knowledge proof that said this particular Linux kernel was made by this compiler with this source code, and it would be very small. So the issue with the current systems is that the ZK systems want to think of their input as circuits, like old school computer circuits. So you can't really program them like you program normal computers. It's more like you're writing Verilog or HDL or some of these like programming languages used to create microchips or other processors. What we did is utilizing some of the advances in this field and our experience optimizing things for GPU. We built a RISC-V microprocessor as the circuit, which then lets you run any program. So you can just write a program in Rust and have it proven in like a zero knowledge context. So that's like the main innovation, and that's what's public. It's the only solution that lets you code in normal programming languages and execute them in a zero knowledge context.
Very cool. And is this microprocessor like actually a physical like processor you've built?
It's totally virtual. So it's
virtual,
a ZK virtual machine. So you see a couple other projects out there, which are really cool. Maiden and name slipping. That's the coolest ones that are building sort of ZK VMs, but they're inventing their own instruction set, a bunch of other things. So it's harder for regular developers to approach the ZK sort of world.
I love that. So the approach that you're taking then is that you're making this a more familiar experience to developers and saying, hey, whatever programming language you already code in, you can code on that, but using our VM, right? Similar to like, hey, if you use VMware to make a virtual machine.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think the crypto space has a bit of, I wouldn't say not invented here. It's just the way the set of people that work on it kind of penciled out. I think people tend to try to build these very tightly vertically integrated stacks. And I think that we've proven over and over that doesn't work. If you look at like App Engine tried to be like the end all be all of cloud platforms, and eventually everybody left it because it was too tightly held.
Interesting. So your current product is then a virtual machine for zero knowledge proofs. Do you also have some kind of surface where people can come and view all the different applications that are being developed?
So we're effectively in the process of building out our chain, let's say, that will enable people to launch applications and other cloud services on it. So that we expect to have available in a limited preview capacity in the next month or two, and then really have it publicly available early next year. So our main product is this RISC-V ZK VM, but that's pretty much completely open source right now. We released it under Apache 2.
Very cool. I think, now that we brought in the chain, it's probably a good idea to talk about your business model. So could you walk us through that and how you guys plan to make money?
Yeah. So it's a good question. I think it's interesting to be in the crypto space because you have more options than you normally would. And it's hard to think about, and also fewer examples of success for doing different kinds of things. So at some point, the plan is to launch a token. The question is like what the nature of that token is and what it looks like. I don't think it's ever going to be this kind of like go up 20x kind of token. It's not meant to be speculative. It's meant to be a real capture of the value of infrastructure. But how to actually launch that's maybe confusing. That said, we're also partnering with a bunch of people who want to use this service. So we're building the first cloud service we're building is something that will let you prove arbitrarily complex programs like Linux kernel compilations or entire Ethereum blocks or anything you really want is this ZK proof of. So we're going to launch that service and provide that as an option for partners to use. And so we'll figure out what revenue looks like there. And then longer term, we're also looking at building more sort of value added services on top of this that could approach more traditional enterprise markets. I think we really want to grow the pie that crypto can address. It's pretty small sort of space right now in terms of applicable use cases. So we really think like, how do we bring over the huge amount of Web 2 developers and really start to enable this technology to solve problems for enterprise outside of the like Hyperledger world anyway.
Gotcha. So you guys, as of now, are not charging any kind of fee to use the virtual machine, any kind of, if you launch a chain, any kind of processing fee on that. It seems like right now your business model is going to be simply based off of the amount of tokens that the company holds. Is that fair?
There might be a fee structure because I think we'd like to structure the token, I think, in a less like wildly speculative manner. So there might be some amount of fees that go back to support the development of the chain, which will probably initially go to us, but long term, we'd like that to be very open.
Very cool. And I like making the analogy here of, hey, if you think of the Apple App Store, you have an iOS SDK for developers, right? And it seems like that's something you already offer them. The parallel there is your virtual machine. Then when you think of the actual App Store where people can come and get access to a variety of different services, it seems like that is in progress. Is that fair to say?
Very much so. It's more like we just have the like Objective-C or Swift runtime and the SDK is not there.
Still working up to there. Okay.
Yeah. Once the SDK will become live at the same time, people can actually launch apps and services on the sort of chain. So like I said, that's going to be early access in the next month or two.
That's awesome. I'm excited. I'm curious. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the industry at large here. You mentioned that there are some other companies that are working on technologies for zero knowledge proofs.
Definitely.
I'm curious, how do you think about winning the industry or becoming one of perhaps a few predominant applications or services within your space?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say it's hard to say who's a competitor to who in this space because everybody has such different approaches to what they're doing. But the sort of prominent people in the space are like Aleo, Matter Labs, Starkware. I don't want to forget a bunch of other people because there's a bunch of people I know at different companies, but there are probably 5 other companies that are kind of nominally in this space. And they all have different takes on really what their sort of target market is. Polygon, obviously, is also huge in the space and doing crazy good on their sort of biz dev efforts. So it's very dynamic. It's competitive and I don't know exactly how people will pivot and how it will all shake out. But we're the only people that I know of that are really focusing on this from a sort of infrastructure bent. And I think that's very aligned with our background as like compiler people and distributed systems people and optimization experts. So
interesting. And it seems like that background in compilers and infrastructure, like going really deep, really low level into the code can be helpful in this space, especially because we see the consequences of when chains have not focused that deeply on some of the low level programming and thought through these problems in, for example, the ginormous gas fees you'll see on Ethereum and et cetera, right? So it seems like crypto, the entire space is kind of in need of that.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's one of the things that our team, I'd say we're like a quote unquote old team for this space. And we have a lot of years behind us, like trying to build infrastructure at scale.
Very nice. So last question here as we wrap up, and our listeners would kill me if I don't ask this because this whole pod has been about building a solution using zero knowledge proofs. But what are zero knowledge proofs? How do they work? If you had to sum it up, layman terms.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of videos up there, but it's kind of hard to sum up without even talking about like Reed Solomon codes and other stuff like that. But somehow you take the computer program, it translates it to the giant system of polynomials, and then you sample it in such a way that you can prove that the computation actually happened, but statistically you can't recover what the sort of computation or inputs were. So it's yet another cryptographic primitive. I think it's just sort of like, yes, like very quickly, RSA and public key cryptography let you make a very limited sort of trust assumption about somebody you don't know on the internet. Like, okay, some central party like VeriSign has said that I am talking to my bank. This is actually Chase.com or First Tech Credit Union or whatever. But you can't do much with that except for build the entire modern internet. So the kind of capabilities that are provided by just a limited sort of ability to trust an untrusted party is pretty incredible. And the way to think about ZK is that it lets you trust so much more from somebody that you don't even know, where there is no central authority. So you can rebuild public key cryptography on top of ZK. You can rebuild a bunch of things on ZK and so many assumptions that people have made throughout the last 3 decades of computing science are like no longer true in a distributed sense. So I think ZK requires anybody building programs that involve trust at all to really reconsider like how the sort of radical change in trust dynamics like disrupts their industry.
Interesting. Is it fair to say that zero knowledge proofs are a computationally more efficient way of enabling trust between applications?
I don't know how computationally efficient they are. Like right now, people achieve trust by trusting centralized authorities. That's very efficient, but it comes with other costs. Right now, you probably pay somewhere between a 4 and 7 orders of magnitude slowdown in computations to get the ZK proof out. It's very computational.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yes.
Okay. Very cool. Awesome. And hey, folks, if you want to check out more about zero knowledge proofs, there's plenty of great explainer videos out there. Hopefully this provided just the high level. I think that's all the time we have on the pod. But right before we sign off, I wanted to ask, so Brian, you recently raised a round this year, or actually 2 rounds already this year. Are you hiring? Is there anything you'd like to plug on the pod?
We're very much hiring. I think we're at 25 people now. We have a bunch of roles open. And beyond that, I think we have a bunch of, we're going to be on ZK podcast coming up, and we'll probably be doing a workshop at ZK Hack. So if people really want to get into this, those are both really good resources for ZK in general and learning more about us.
Awesome. And if our listeners want to connect with you personally or follow you, what's the best platform? Would it be Twitter or LinkedIn or?
It's Twitter for sure. Yeah.
Twitter. And would you mind dropping your handle?
Yeah, it's at Brian Retford, I think.
At Brian Retford.
Yeah, I hope so.
There you go, folks. Go ahead and follow Brian. I hope you enjoyed all of his insights into zero knowledge proofs. I think the approach he's taking to building this space is very inspiring. Brian, it was such a treat to have you on. Thank you so much for coming on the pod. And I think that's it, folks. We'll see you next time on the breakouts. Bye-bye. All right, and that wraps up today's episode. We really hope you enjoyed it. Now, just before I let you go, I wanted to reiterate one thing. We're trying to build the best podcast out there for aspiring entrepreneurs, and to do that, we need your help. The best way you can help us is by joining our Discord community. The link is in the description below, and then leaving us feedback. Tell us how we did. Tell us how we can improve. We're eagerly waiting to hear from you. Other than that, show us some love and follow us on Twitter at The Breakouts Pod. And I think that's everything I have for you. We'll see you next time on The Breakouts.